Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. This story takes place about 5 years ago. In the late 2010s, my friends and I would frequent a small billiards place in a neighboring town where you could rent a table by the hour or play per game. We'd play a few games, watch whatever sports were on TV, and have casual conversations. There were no problems and no drama until about 3 months of us visiting this place. A guy shows up and takes our spot at the billiards table. No big deal. We were all chatting anyway. 20 minutes later, my friend Mike lets him know we want to play next game, and the jerk is super dismissive. "Hey man, we'd like to play next if that's cool," Mike said politely. The guy barely looked up from his shot. "Yeah, whatever," he mumbled before turning back to the table. Needless to say, we didn't get in during the next game, so I politely let him know we wanted to play next. Another lady chimed in she wanted the game after us. The guy blatantly ignored me and the other woman. "Excuse me," I said, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. "We've been waiting for quite a while." He just turned his back to me and continued playing. The woman waiting behind us sighed loudly. "Is this guy for real?" she whispered. Some more time going by and the guy leaves the table. We see our chance to get in. We put the quarters in and the balls are dispensed, except the green 6 inches ball. The guy took it to the bathroom with him. "Did he just—" my friend Lisa asked, looking at the incomplete rack. "He totally did," I replied, shaking my head in disbelief. At this point, it was ridiculous, and we notified the manager. The manager noted it was 12:30, and they were going to be calling last call and closing, so he didn't want to make a scene by kicking him out. He gets us another ball so we can play. "Sorry, folks," the manager said with an apologetic shrug. "We're closing soon anyway. Here's another 6 ball you can use." The guy comes out of the bathroom and knows we realized what he did. He smirks and proceeds to the patio to have a cigarette, bringing along his beer and the green billiard ball. "Look at this jerk," whispered my friend Dave. "He's actually proud of himself." The guy comes back in and tossed the ball he was holding onto the table, hitting a few balls on the table and messing up our game. He goes up to the bar just in time for last call. "Oops," he said with an exaggerated innocence that fooled no one. "My bad." One of the friends I was with, Chris, suggested we follow him home and each call the highway patrol to report a suspected drunk driver. 3 of 4 of us agree, so when he leaves, we used our smartphones and coordinated several calls to the police. We provided details like license plate, vehicle make and model and color, and mentioned the car nearly hit another vehicle, was swerving between lines and driving erratically. This was under a 15-minute plan. We had no idea where the guy lived, but suspected it was close as he was visiting a neighborhood place, so our time was limited. "I'll go first," I said into my phone. "Silver Honda Civic, license plate BTR 492, driving erratically on Maple Street heading east." "Wait 5 minutes before your call," Chris instructed Lisa. "Different reports will seem more credible." The one guy who didn't notify the police, Dave, tailed the jerk and called us giddy when a police officer pulled between him and the guy and turned on his lights to pull him over. "Guys, you won't believe it," Dave's excited voice came through the speaker. "They got him. Cop car just lit up behind him. He's pulling over now." The police blotter that week included an arrest of a guy who was pulled over after multiple calls of erratic driving. He wasn't arrested for DWI, but instead for driving on a suspended license. "Check this out," Chris said the following weekend, showing us the police blotter on his phone. "Our pool table thief got booked for driving on a suspended license." Lisa raised her glass. "To justice being served. And to never messing with people who just want to play some pool," I added with a grin. The next one is an entitled people story. I've owned my small ranch for about 15 years now. It's nothing fancy, just 20 acres of land where I keep a few horses, some chickens, and grow hay for feed. The property backs up against a wooded area, and for the longest time I had the most peaceful neighbors you could ask for. That all changed when my old neighbor sold his property to this new guy who moved in from the city. From day one, this neighbor made it clear he thought ranch life was beneath him. He'd moved out to the country for the peace and quiet, he said, but apparently that peace and quiet didn't include the natural sounds of farm animals or the smell of hay and horses. Within his first month, he was already complaining about my rooster crowing in the morning. I tried to explain that roosters crow at dawn and there wasn't much I could do about it, but he just huffed and said I should get rid of it or keep it inside. Inside. A rooster. Things escalated from there. He complained about the smell of manure when I was fertilizing my fields. He complained about the dust when I drove my truck down my own driveway. He even complained about my border collie barking when she was herding the chickens. Every week brought a new complaint, and every week I had to politely explain that this was ranch country, and these were normal ranch activities that had been happening long before he moved in. The guy had this attitude where he thought he could just tell everyone what to do. He'd moved to a rural area but wanted it to operate like some manicured suburban neighborhood with an HOA. The problem was, we didn't have an HOA, and this was agricultural land zoned for exactly what I was doing. About 6 months into his residency, I noticed he'd started dumping his yard waste along the fence line between our properties. At first, it was just grass clippings and leaves, which honestly wasn't a huge deal, but it annoyed me because it was clearly on my side of the fence. I went over and asked him nicely to stop, and he just shrugged and said the wind must have blown it over there. The wind. In neat piles. I let it slide because I didn't want to start a war with my neighbor, but that turned out to be a mistake. He took my silence as permission. The piles got bigger. Soon he was dumping branches, old wood, and other debris. Then came the real trash. Bags of household garbage, broken furniture, old appliances. This guy was literally using my property as his personal dump. The final straw came on a weekend morning when I went out to check on the horses and found he'd dumped an entire load of renovation debris along my fence. We're talking broken drywall, old tiles, construction waste, even some paint cans. It was a massive pile that would have cost him a few $100 to haul to the proper disposal site. Instead, he'd just backed his trailer up to my fence line and dumped it all on my land. I was furious. I marched over to his house and confronted him about it. He actually had the nerve to tell me that since I had all this land anyway, what did it matter? He said I was being unreasonable and that good neighbors help each other out. When I told him he needed to remove all of it immediately, he laughed and said something that would turn out to be his biggest mistake. He told me that if I had such a problem with it, I should call the county and report it. He said this with this smug look on his face, like he was daring me to do it. He clearly thought nothing would come of it or that I wouldn't bother. What he didn't know was that I'd been reading up on county regulations for months, ever since his complaints started, just to make sure everything I was doing on my ranch was by the book. So I did exactly what he suggested. I called the county. Now, here's where my research paid off. Our county has extremely strict regulations about illegal dumping and waste disposal. I'd learned about these regulations because I wanted to make sure I was disposing of my ranch waste properly. What my neighbor didn't realize was that our county had recently cracked down hard on illegal dumping because it had become a major problem in rural areas. People from the city were driving out to the countryside and dumping their trash on vacant land to avoid disposal fees. The county had implemented hefty fines and hired additional code enforcement officers specifically to combat this issue. The base fine for illegal dumping started at $5,000, but it scaled up based on the volume and type of waste. Hazardous materials like paint and chemicals carried additional penalties. Repeat offenses could double or triple the fines. When the code enforcement officer came out, I showed him everything. I walked him along the entire fence line and documented every pile of trash, every bag of garbage, every piece of construction debris. I had photos with timestamps showing when each new pile appeared. I even had security camera footage from my barn that showed my neighbor backing his trailer up to the fence and dumping the construction waste. The officer was thorough. He took measurements, photographs, and samples. He noted the paint cans and other potentially hazardous materials. He documented that this was clearly not a one-time incident, but a pattern of illegal dumping spanning several months. He told me this was one of the more clear-cut cases he'd seen. My neighbor must have seen the county vehicle in my driveway because he came storming over, demanding to know what was going on. The officer calmly explained that he was investigating a report of illegal dumping and that my neighbor would be receiving a citation in the mail. My neighbor's face went white. He suddenly tried to backtrack, saying it was all a misunderstanding and that the trash must have blown over from somewhere else. The officer wasn't buying it. He'd seen the security footage. He'd seen the volume of waste and the nature of the materials. This wasn't trash that had blown over in the wind. This was deliberate, repeated, illegal dumping. A few weeks later, my neighbor received his citation. The fine was $15,000, $5,000 for the initial illegal dumping violation, another $5,000 for the hazardous materials, and an additional $5,000 because the county considered this a severe case due to the volume and duration of the dumping. He also had to pay for the cleanup and disposal costs, which added another couple thousand on top of the fine. My neighbor absolutely lost it. He came over screaming about how I'd ruined him, how the fine was ridiculous, how I should have just let it go. I calmly reminded him that he was the one who told me to call the county if I had a problem with it. I'd simply followed his suggestion. I'd complied exactly with what he'd told me to do. He threatened to sue me. He threatened to file counter complaints about my ranch. He tried everything to get out of the fine, but the evidence was overwhelming and the county wasn't budging. He'd violated clear regulations, and he had to pay the price. What made it even better was that when he tried to file complaints about my ranch operations, the county investigated and found that I was in full compliance with all agricultural regulations. Every permit was in order. Every activity was legal and proper for agriculturally zoned land. His complaints went nowhere. The guy tried to fight the fine for months, but eventually he had to pay it. The financial hit was substantial enough that about a year later, he ended up selling his property and moving back to the city. The new neighbors who moved in are actual ranch people who understand rural life. They wave when they see me, and we help each other out with actual neighborly things, not by dumping trash on each other's property. The whole situation taught me an important lesson about dealing with entitled people. Sometimes when someone tells you to do something thinking you won't or that nothing will come of it, the best response is to do exactly what they said. My neighbor told me to call the county, so I did. He just never imagined it would cost him $15,000. Looking back, I probably could have handled things differently. I could have tried harder to work things out, maybe offered to help him find proper disposal options. But honestly, after months of his entitled attitude, his constant complaints about my legitimate ranch operations, and his blatant disrespect for my property, I was done being nice. He wanted to treat my land like his personal dump? Fine. But he was going to pay the price for it. The irony is that if he'd just been a decent neighbor from the start, if he'd respected that he was moving to an agricultural area with working ranches, none of this would have happened. He could have saved $15,000 by simply paying a few hundred for proper waste disposal. Instead, his arrogance and entitlement cost him dearly. These days, my ranch is peaceful again. The horses graze without piles of trash along the fence. The rooster crows every morning like he's supposed to. And I never have to worry about finding garbage dumped on my property. Sometimes malicious compliance really is the best compliance. The next one is a petty revenge story. I was dumpster driving outside a thrift shop. I'm an artist who works with reclaimed materials, so I'm a semi-regular garbage picker. When I do, it's always bins on public property, and I always leave the site cleaner than when I found it as a way to say thank you. Many businesses discourage dumpster diving for liability reasons. If I'm asked to leave, I leave. At least 3 thrift shop employees saw me digging through their dumpster and did not care. I even chatted with one guy, and he helped me out by finding me a box to carry my stuff. Just as I'm packing up to leave, Karen comes out and says, "You can't put stuff in our dumpster." I say I'm not, and I carry on gathering my things. She starts to go off on me that I'm stealing. She points to a skate I had in my pile and says, "Those are skates we could be selling." It was a single skate that I had found in someone else's garbage, and I told her as much. I informed her that my pile contained trash that I had collected from around the neighborhood. She continued to falsely accuse me of stealing, and how the dumpster was on private property. It's not. She went back inside in a huff. I put a bunch of stuff back in the dumpster, which she technically explicitly told me not to do. But I clean up as I always do, making sure to not leave any trash outside the dumpster. But before I left, I placed the single skate dead center in front of the dumpster. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I've worked at an accounting firm for 6 years. For the first 5 years, whenever I'd have a notable interaction with a client, I'd log this on a shared spreadsheet that I created. Everyone I worked with had access to this, and you could literally just CTRLF the account information and find whatever you needed. Super simple. If ever my manager Zara needed a quick update on an account, she'd call me and I'd give her all the information she needed. At the 5-year mark, I'd managed to annoy Sarah by cutting back on attending optional social-only outings despite having made them aware I do suffer with social anxiety and was off my medication. I was polite and professional in work as usual, just declined optional work outings. Side note. I tried for years, but it was a lot of cattiness. I'd even been sexually harassed, gaslit about it, and even openly insulted at these events before I decided no more. Off the back of this annoyance, Sarah decided that my spreadsheet was too intricate and time-consuming to access, and it needed to be logged upon the accounting system itself, alongside my spreadsheet. The accounting system was often slow, at times non-functional. The logging process was moderately time-consuming, but slowed my role majorly to have to fully pull up each account just to update an email trail. I initially pushed back and asked why the sudden change. How was loading a spreadsheet more complex? This wasn't how I was trained, etc. Sarah told me it was easier for her to see notes on the accounts themselves. I asked why this has suddenly become a problem after 5 years. She had no answer other than she'd always preferred them on the account, but now she wants to action it. I started logging notes on the system begrudgingly, alongside my spreadsheet. Sarah continued to use my spreadsheet regularly. She would also continue to call for updates even when I had made 2 sets of notes for her convenience. She never checked my notes on the accounting system, but I continued to log. It was only when I noticed none of my coworkers were being asked to log to the extent I was that I started slowly reverting back to my spreadsheet. Sarah didn't care about this at all, but was prone to mood swings. When she would be having a bad day, she would remember how to check notes on the accounting system just to call me up and berate me for not having logged them. Sometimes I would push back with points made above, but she wouldn't even address this. Occasionally I'd get an I know, and then she would just continue on her rants about how it just needs doing. The straw came for me when Sarah was having a particularly challenging period, called me up and basically threatened my employment should I not log each interaction I made to her specifications. Quite frankly, with all listed above, I am done with this place. I have put things in place to leave and will be doing so before the year is over. However, with regards to this particular issue, I decided to comply maliciously. I logged every single interaction, every pointless email, every nothing CC, every call, every text. If I had so much as a one-word okay from a customer, it went everywhere I could squeeze text into on the accounting system. I started writing brief abbreviations that only I could understand on my spreadsheet so that I could quickly find the information I needed, but Sarah would have to wade through 20 emails, transcripts, and texts to find what she needed. It took a lot of my time to manage, but I persevered. Other areas did suffer, but Sarah didn't care about that. Sarah was just happy I had submitted to her ever-changing whims. I also grew a backbone when Sarah would call and would insist heavily that she check my notes on the accounting system, as suddenly I am just so forgetful and wouldn't want to leave out any important information. She knew what I was doing, but she couldn't do a thing about it. As I'd told several coworkers about how happy I was, Sarah pushed me to use the accounting system, how smart she was, it saved me so much time, etc. My good times with watching her sift through countless texts and emails came to an end last month. After 6 months of watching her wade through the ocean of emails, transcripts, and texts I would leave on each of my accounts, I checked my emails one morning to find that Sarah had, without any communication, scheduled a one weekly occurrence meeting with me, solely to get updates on all my accounts. I accepted the invite with glee and waited for it to roll around. When the meeting commenced, Sarah pulled out a notebook where she had been keeping every query on my accounts she had over the past week. It was surprisingly extensive, but I imagine she'd been stockpiling a lot longer than a week to be petty, and also to avoid using her convenient new logging method. I listened and nodded, customer service smile on my face while she explained how it needed to be a meeting because sometimes I just don't have time to check notes. And I think it's easier for all of us to do it this way. I agreed, wholeheartedly. A smug smile crept across her face, and she told me the first account she would need an update on. Without skipping a beat or allowing one crack in my customer service smile, I put on my screen share and it showed the account she had queried on accounting system with the notes tab open. She's smug smile dropped, replaced by a look of poorly composed, white-hot, seething rage. I then, bar for bar, read the entirety of the relevant notes on the account. No paraphrasing, no deviation from the written text whatsoever. Same with the next account, and the next. By the time the call had concluded, Sarah had a face like thunder and didn't even say goodbye when the call ended. The following day, there was a team-wide email issued with the subject, Urgent Notes Update. It was a 1-paragraph email about how, due to some site issues, the accounting system was no longer suitable to store our notes, and we are to return to the prior system of keeping our own records. I'm still leaving, but that look on Sarah's face will be enough to placate me until I do. The next one is an entitled people story, so a little backstory. I have lived in the house for almost 14 years. When I moved in, it was to rent a room in the basement of a family home. I knew the husband and was offered a place to live. Several years ago, they got divorced, and long story short, I stayed and have been living peacefully with her and her kids. They do their thing, I do mine, and I help out when needed. There were 3 girls and a boy. The boy is the youngest and is in kindergarten. So, 9 months ago, she gets a call from a childhood friend who needed help, so she moved in. She had issues with addiction, which I don't shame anyone for, and her mother had custody of her kids. In May, her mom was evicted and the kids ended up moving in with us. Since her kids moved in, 1-year-old boy and 5-year-old girl, the dynamic changed. The girls spend most of their time with the baby, and the little boy has been excluded. It has started to cause behavior problems with him, and like we see as frustration. So, after talking to his mom, I have been taking him on adventures with just us for someone on one time. He is a good kid, listens very well in public, and when told no, he doesn't whine about it, he just says okay and moves on. So I have been doing this for going on 3 months. We go to the zoo, I take him to see movies, we go out to lunch, just dudes being dudes, you know. Now the entitlement. The new roommate approached my roommate and said it's unfair that I'm favoring the boy. She said that if I'm going to spend money on one kid, I have to do that with all of them. No, I do not. None of these kids are mine. And I'm just some dude who rents a room in the basement. If I decide to spend money on someone, it is my choice of who and what it is spent on. I have no obligation to her, or any of her kids. I'm nice to them, but to be honest, I don't like her daughter. She lies about almost anything. She breaks things just so others can't have them. And no matter what is asked of her, she argues about it. She also pesters the boy till he reacts and then tells on him for reacting. Anyway, this past weekend I am tinkering on my electric scooter 'cause maintenance and all that. The little boy comes over and we just hang out. I show him some stuff by opening the battery compartment and give him a rundown of all the parts and what they do. Yet again, just dudes being dudes. Well, he was telling his mom about it and was all excited to show off his new knowledge. Yesterday I went online and got him a kid's electric scooter. When I came home from work, I told his mom about it, and then the new roommate said, "Oh, that's cool. The kids will love it." I stopped her and made clear that it isn't for the kids, it is for him. It is going to be his property, and if he says she isn't allowed to ride it, the answer is no. She then starts to throw a fit because I'm being inconsiderate of her child, and now she is going to have to deal with a disappointed child. That's not my problem. I bought this for him so we could go out riding, just the two of us. Her daughter being disappointed is not my concern. I don't exclude her kid when we do things around the house. I give her treats and snacks just like the rest of the kids, but that's about as far as I'm willing to go with it. Her daughter doesn't know how to act in public and demands everything she sees, frequently throwing meltdown tantrums in stores when told no. I'm not putting myself in the situation where I'm responsible for that. I've already talked with the older girls and they understand why I'm showing him a bit more attention. In fact, the older two have been actively including him in more things since we talked. They told me they did feel bad for not including him in stuff, but they have been babysitting the baby and have been kind of preoccupied with it. The younger daughter just gave me a hug and said, "It's okay, Christmas is coming up." Anyway, I never even met this chicken before January, and now she thinks I should be buying stuff for her kid. The next one is an entitled parent story. Oh boy, didn't think I'd be posting this, but I feel like I'm going insane and need someone else to just tell me I'm not overreacting. Long story ahead for some backstory. Mother had always been very babying and wouldn't let me take any responsibility until I turned 16, at which point she expected me to do everything myself. We've had our fair share of arguments, which typically started from me forgetting or messing up something, such as forgetting my morning medication, I take 6 different pills every morning, not fun, or telling her to unblock my father after she got mad because he criticized her for constantly misgendering and dead-naming me. I have been out to her for 5 years and started to socially transition fully this year. A couple weeks ago, we got into an argument that ended in me storming off out of the house, annoyed after she came back home, worried because I had hung up on her calls. She and father had another petty argument about my and his upcoming trip, so I told her off, told her to talk it out like a grown adult, and slammed the front door. The thing is, I was going to an art club. It's a hobby she helped me start, and which was every week on that same Thursday evening. She quickly ran out of the door, stared to pull on my hair, arm, and finally coat sleeve. We argued in the front door and she was yelling her lungs out at me. A few things I remember were her threatening to call the police, unlist me in a school for autistic kids that she also helped me get into when high school made me almost kill myself, threatening to send me to a psych ward and said people were looking and she had to be once again ashamed of me. I quickly shoved out everything from my pockets into my bag and pulled off my coat. We live in a Nordic country, it was 10°C outside at that point, and started running while hyperventilating and crying. My mother was blowing up my phone and apparently yelling at my dad red-faced because he manipulated me into being against her and even called my grandparents, her side, father's side, grandparents passed before I was born. In the end, I got to the yard of the public library and heard a car horn behind me with glaring headlights. It was pitch dark outside at this time already, which only worsened my panic, causing me to sprint inside with the little energy I had left and lock myself inside the bathroom, hysterically sobbing and trying to call my father if he could come pick me up. I ended up explaining everything that had happened, and he promised he'd come drive by the library as soon as he got off work, while my mother was still trying to message and call me. At some point, she calmed down a bit after my father told her on call that I was safe and warm. She asked where I was and told him she just wanted to bring me my coat and medications. And when he didn't tell her, she said she'd never forgive him for not telling her. I just want to ask what sane parent would tell where their child was after that other parent was screaming at them for 30 minutes on the phone, and their child was crying in a panic, begging to be picked up because they ran away from that parent in fear of physical violence. So he picked me up while I hid in the back seat of the car, in fear of her waiting at his front door. I calmed down and got some food and water as we got inside, yada yada. Apparently, my psychiatrist, who I'd been seeing for over a year now, was walking by as I was running away, saw me making a duck and sprint for it without a coat, and called my mom to ask what was happening, at which point she was still so distraught she confessed to the psychiatrist, who informed CPS of what had happened. Us three were assigned a meeting with a CPS agent last week, and we're all having individual meetings this week. Mine is tomorrow on Thursday. You'd think that day is cursed at this point. In that meeting, I asked my mother what she would do if my father had done all of that. Would she have told him where I was after I was sobbing and panicking while he was yelling at her on the phone? I pressed her on the same question 5 times when she only sat in silence, getting increasingly agitated every time. Eventually, she muttered, "I suppose I wouldn't have. You suppose." At that point, I was pissed off. When the topic came to how she treated me, I went off for 20 minutes past our planned meeting time about how she always treated me like a child thanks to my autism, everything hurtful she had ever said, including telling me, "You're not a ducking retard," she works in special education, when I was crying on the kitchen floor when we were arguing after I opened up about my mental health struggles, which she had been very aware of. I always tried to hide them in concern of causing too much worry for her, but I now see she was honestly just ducking guilt-tripping me all along. I named so many times where she had manipulated me, defamed my father, who I earlier had issues with due to miscommunication, and he actually understood, grew from that conversation and got therapy, guilted me for having my own issues despite everything she had done for me, and how she acted like I was being so unjust for running away, and I shouldn't be angry at her for such a small issue. I was not angry. I never was. I was ducking terrified. After I finally calmed down, she was mortified. I think I saw a few tears run down her cheek, but I couldn't be sure. She eventually spoke up, and her only question was, "So you think I've never done anything for you?" At that point, I snapped again. I had just talked about how she would never listen to me and take her own perception of what I said as truth. I was so close to beating the crap out of her at that point, but as soon as I got up from the chair, my father stopped me and put a hand on my shoulder, guiding me to sit back down. Bless his heart, truly. Funny thing is, that meeting was 2 days after I had moved out to live on campus. We had shared custody, so I legally couldn't stay at my dad's place forever, so I instead talked to our principal if I could live on campus. Me and my dad quickly signed the contract. We only had to pay €20 in collateral fees for the keys, and everything else was completely free, including 3 meals a day delivered to the shared kitchen's fridge. They even made sure to make special prep meals for me since I have ARFID and struggle with a lot of complex foods with multiple ingredients mixed. After the meeting, my father had to go back to work. The campus was a 20-minute drive away from our hometown, and my mother was the only one free to drive me back there. The whole walk back, I was so relieved because I got to tell her everything I had wanted to say, and she couldn't interrupt and deny everything every 5 seconds like she always did. The whole car ride, she was dead quiet. I had a beaming, smug smile and refused to talk to her at all. When we got back onto campus, she asked something along the lines of, "Can't I at least get a hug?" To which I gave her the finger and walked inside. I still feel like that was a little mean, but honestly, she deserved it. I still have her blocked on everything and had made it very clear I refuse to communicate with her until she gets therapy like she forced me to do when I was diagnosed with conduct disorder and exhibited severe traits of ASPD. I haven't heard from her directly, but apparently her therapist suspects she has NPD from my and my father's reports. They had been married for 11 years before divorcing, and she had always been a bit narcissistic according to him. I still feel great about it, and honestly I have absolutely zero sympathy for her. I won't go no contact until I turn 18 since she still receives my disability funds for some ducking reason, and I need them for the ever-growing list of medication I need to take. Getting bipolar meds, soon #mentally stable, #slay queen. Was I being unreasonably cruel? My grandmother keeps telling me I should make up with my mother, and even my father agreed with me but thought I was a tiny bit too mean sometimes. He was mainly concerned that she'd victimize herself if I was too mean to her, which she has done in the past a lot. But I still feel like the crap she got was deserved. I know she had been crying a lot after that, but honestly just knowing that makes me feel even better. Let that idiot weep for the consequences of her own actions. Anyway, thank you for watching.